What the hell is VPD? Well, in this video, we're going to get into it. You're here with Mark Batwell on Perfect Gardens TV. I just want to say thank you so much to Noofs709 for having such an intuitive and keen awareness around her plants. I've been doing my best to post more plant deficiency problems as they arise within our group to the free community so that you guys can guess on it and just stir over it. And at the end of the day, she was the one that was able to really point out VPD. I also want to just say thank you so much also to Death Leopard Sucks, because she asked me, hey, love the video, could you make a video on VPD? So pretty much within 1 day apart, we thought we'd invite Ab Sai back onto the channel, the leading hygronomist and biologist in Canada leading the charge for the Canada plants. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. We got our $2.99 membership, and we have a VIP if you need a little more one-on-one. Link down in the description. Okay, so turn it over to Av. You've seen him on the channel a few times. He is a top leading agronomist, biologist in Canada, leading the charge for the Canada plant, and here to talk to you more about VPD. So what is it, and why is this so important?
Oh, so yeah. Well, thanks for having me again, Mark. VPD is something that was very commonplace in controlled environment agriculture, and so was used a lot in greenhouses, and only recently has it really come to prominence in can growing as more regulation, and we started kind of putting some science into how we're growing indoors. But very simply, VPD is a measurement. It's a tool to kind of measure the difference in the amount of gases, or in the case of in our controlled environment, the vapor pressure that's in the air compared to what is the vapor pressure in the leaf. Arguably, it's trying to talk about that difference between the amount of vapor pressure or gases that are collected in the leaf and how much is in the air. And that difference is the ability to really have transpiration happen within the plant.
So tell me if I'm correct to how I think about it. This is kind of like an osmotic effect, but with vapor pressure, with vapor and gases than with liquids. Is that correct?
Yeah, with osmosis, there's usually this type of gradient where things are going from a high concentration to a lower concentration, and that's essentially what we're trying to do with establishing a vapor pressure deficit. I mean, that's kind of the goal in a controlled environment agriculture. In nature, this happens just very naturally, and the plant responds accordingly. There's ways that the plant responds to creating a vapor pressure deficit and differential within an outdoor environment. In an indoor environment, we're kind of playing that role, and so we actually have to maintain certain parameters in our environmental conditions to create that differential gradient to allow for things like transpiration.
So next question, just diving into what everyone wants to know, what types of deficiencies, because I sent you a picture of the day and you sent me back a possibility around VPD, and I thought that was really interesting. What type of deficiencies or will you see when the VPD is off?
Yeah, and I tend to get a lot of those type of deficiencies because I just grow cannabis oftentimes just in my home, right? And our home environment, I think in Canada, is not going to be ideal growing condition. And so I don't actually have a defined parameters, and I'm not going to be able to deliver the ideal vapor pressure differential. So I start seeing nutrient disorders. Very common one if your VPD is too low. So you've got either low temperatures or relatively, a higher humidity. You're essentially going to have a low vapor pressure deficit. And in that case, what happens is I'm not getting great transpiration. So when I don't get great transpiration, many of my nutrients, in particular calcium, becomes deficient. And calcium is actually the great transporter of so many other nutrients as well. So you may start seeing some other nutrient deficiencies occurring, not only because, in large part, because calcium is not coming through into the plant. So if you're not having transpiration, you're not bringing calcium's not bringing other nutrients. But oftentimes calcium is the first one to show for myself, and you start that characteristic examples of the rust little spots happening on your lower leaves. Just stagnant growth is very common to see when you've got a vapor pressure differential. I think in the picture that we were talking about, I think especially when you're looking at deformities in new growth, that can often be a calcium deficiency and or a boron deficiency. So remember, calcium's not overly mobile once it gets placed in the plant. And so when you see typical deficiencies of calcium, it's going to happen in the new growth. Similarly with boron, calcium and boron are so interlinked. One people, people have referred to it as like the transport and the driver. So they're so interlinked in moving a lot of nutrients. On the other end, when your vapor pressure deficit is incredibly high, and another disorder that we typically see would be like a nutrient burn. I think many of us have gotten into that situation where perhaps our humidity drops incredibly low, our temperatures rise incredibly high, and now we've got a very high vapor pressure deficit. And because of that, the plant will close its pores to try to save the amount of water. It'll close its pores. The pores we call stomates or stomata. Mm-hmm. And those stomata will regulate either gas exchange, but also water vapor exchange. And so the stomates close, nutrients collect in the plant. You get excessive nutrients, you typically will get a nutrient burn.
So I've been told many times this is probably the wrong way to look at it, but in my mind, I imagine when I put my feet in the water for too long and they come out all crinkly, that's having like too low a vapor pressure deficit, right? Because it for some reason the stomata is closed. I'm not sure what's happening inside the plant. It may be the water, because it's not breathing, it's becoming alkaline or toxic or stagnated or something. And I don't know why. And that's why I also want to dig a little more. Why does it lock out the calcium? But then I imagine being in a desert, right? You vapor pressure, being dehydrated, skin cracking, and then that allows for pathogens or other issues to creep into the plant. For my brain, is that kind of what happens to the leaf in these different pressures?
You definitely speak to the ability of plants, and in our case animals, responding to environmental conditions. So when we talk about vapor pressure deficit, we're almost talking about a tool, a measuring tool, but we have to remember that there are so many other things that go on, that VPD is not just this blank box that just can be implemented. The plant will respond to things like, if you increase its temperature in the room, you notice that a leaf will canoe, right? It starts canoeing. That's a plant's physiological response to low humidity, high temperatures. It's going to curl its plants to reduce the amount of exposure to the environment, so it's not going to release. Why we get pruned fingers is the body's response to the fact that it could lose more and more water if it doesn't essentially, you lose some of those oils and you start getting that pruning. But it's a response that the body creates to preserve its sort of osmotic potential of the cells. So, we have to understand that there are things that we can do as growers, as your mechanical engineer designing your HVAC system, but we also have to remember that the plant can respond in various ways. And so we have to be alert to look for things like a nutrient disorder, a deficiency, lack of a trichome expression, or anything like that. As growers, we may need to tweak things like our temperature, our relative humidity, the amount of water, the amount of nutrients based on our measuring tool of VPD.
I see how you do it, and you actually hit these right here. Increase humidity, decrease humidity, light intensity, increase and decrease. And how you do it is how I do it. It's actually, I go into a grow room, or I go into an environment, or wherever, even if I'm in the greenhouse and I feel the light penetrating through the greenhouse, or if I'm under one shade cloth or versus the other, I can feel all the environmental differences in my body. And over the years, I've been able to guide these environments, right, based upon what I feel and what I feel to be, and through my observations of what I feel comfortable and the observations of how measuring my metrics on the plants, I've created this relationship. But I've also realized, VPD was never something that was in my awareness or scope of awareness 5 years ago, right? It was just my feel of the environment. And then this word started popping out. I was like, what the hell is VPD? And I guess my point to why in my mind now is very interested in it is because I do everything through text, audio, video. So I'm not in the grow rooms anymore. And I missed a few things, or I don't want to say I missed a few things, but I have recently adjusted a few things based upon some of our last conversations, because I realized like what I see, plants look healthy, certain things. So I'm not adjusting. Maybe an issue happens, like say leaf curling. So I'm like, okay, and now I see certain signs in the plant. So let's adjust to certain things. But now I'm thinking, okay, now I might have a tool where went over this, I say, okay, let's have a tool where I'm like, okay, guys, let's look. Maybe you can help me understand this chart. And this is kind of small. I apologize.
Yeah.
But in the early vegetative area, like I want to be able to help. If I set this chart to someone, I was like, guys, I want you to use this chart to be aware, like this is veg time. This is, this is babies. This is veg, and this is flowering, right, or something. How do I use this chart or a chart like this to give a completely a grower that's never grown before, and I tell them, look for these, set your temperature and your ambient temperature, set this for your humidity for your ambient temperature. But here's a chart too, though, where things are going to adjust. How do I use a chart like this for them?
Right. I'm not overly familiar with this particular chart of Pulse, but I assume Pulse, they do controls?
They do controllers, exactly. And this might be
Right.
a bad chart. I could probably find another one you like.
No, and there's one that I often use through Quest, the folks who come out with dehumidifiers and whatnot. But that's fine. That chart from Pulse was probably good. It looked like it had a VPD calculator as well. So I think, I know that Fluence has one as well. It is nice to try to find somebody who has done a bit of work around Canada as well. And not to pick on mechanical engineers in any way, because they're valuable. They're going to do all those calculations that calculate how to do VPD and whatnot. For me, it's so important to have a grower in there involved as well, right? Because growers will be able to say, yeah, but here's why I want it won't necessarily look as perfect. Yeah, I'm looking as you're doing that, because I've seen better ones from Quest as well. I can share them, but that one might work as well. The reason I like the ones that Quest does usually come out with is that it will say, okay, in clones, I want a VPD of this, or at veg period, I want that VPD to be 0.8 kilopascals. In early flower, I want it to be, I think, something like 1.1 kilopascals. They just give you that range where you would kind of fit that in. But most growers do have those parameters in mind, right? When you look at a VPD chart like we have, it is a cross between your relative humidity and your temperature, right? So many growers will know that, okay, so in my clone phase, I'm going to have 80 Fahrenheit and I'm going to have 80% relative humidity. If they go ahead and do that, that's essentially their VPD. Then they may have parameters where they say, okay, I want 83 at the leaf in veg and I want to have 65% relative humidity. Well, you look that up on the chart. Go to that mark. Yeah, if you can go to that, and if you can see, let's go to a temperature of
83 right here.
83,
and we're in flowering.
And no, we're still in veg. Let's say we're in veg.
Oh, okay.
And
this chart's just for flowering. I apologize.
Oh, I see.
I saw that. I apologize.
That's kind of nice. So in flowering, what typically would you recommend as a baseline for most strains?
The other day you've identified something. I'm looking between 70s and 80s. So that's where I'm looking for. Like if you say between there, if you say look, and that's what I tell people to search for and try to, like you say, a lot of people's environments aren't so exact. So I try not to give them a specific and just a range, and then we work from there.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm typically going to push most growers, and especially if you're growing under LED, to try to have about 83 Fahrenheit at the leaf.
Okay.
And I do that. We would typically have an infrared thermometer, which we would aim at the top of the canopy and do that measurement. Right. If you're growing under HPS, maybe your room temperature is going to be around 75, knowing that your leaf temperature might be significantly higher because of the light heat. Right. But we tend to do that in flowering. We push 83 at the leaf. There's a couple of reasons for that. And then I'll just tell you that our relative humidity starts out in early flowering at around 60%, and it will work its way down to 50% relative humidity. So if we took 55 as our mid, so we drag 83 and 55.
83 right here.
Yeah,
and 55.
Yeah. So we're sort of in the fringe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here's why we're in the fringe. A couple of reasons. We tend to promote slightly higher temperatures because in Canada, it will translate into actually having reduced HVAC costs. I'll have to leave that to the mechanical engineers to explain, but having higher temperatures allows for them to be able to
not run the machines as much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, when you were explaining this in like 3 seconds, it clicked. And I was like, you know what? Because for me, for me, I'm always looking at the plant and its health, right? So I can adjust the equipment. I try to adjust the equipment for me to look for something specific. And I was saying between 70 and 80. So then when I swing over here, I'm always okay between 50 and 55%. But then I was thinking like it's
You're
making the machines work a lot harder to get there.
but
If I can get
you're bang on in the green. You're in the right zone that most people would recommend you to be in. The other reason why we don't is because we also know that we're going to be pumping in CO2.
Mhm.
And for us, CO2, there's a particular enzyme that we know performs a little bit better at higher temperatures. And because of that, we want to make sure our temperatures are slightly higher because we'll get that rubisco enzyme, that coenzyme that really helps photosynthesis. Well, the plant will produce more of it at a higher temperature. So we push it a little bit that way. And the other reason is that we know that when you go beyond 75 Fahrenheit, you really significantly reduce the amount of the chance of getting powdery mildew. Powdery mildew really does not respond well to temperatures above 75. So as long as you can keep above 75, it doesn't necessarily have to be 83. That's just typically where we start with. And then of course the power of the grower's observations. Yeah, and that's when you'll start tweaking that. But the important thing is like whenever you add things like CO2 or increase your light intensity, increase temperatures, you also have to, of course, most likely you'll have to increase your nutrients and you'll have to increase your water.
You in this short conversation, you dramatically opened up my awareness and also, yeah, just you took me totally outside my frame of thinking and made things so much more efficient. Like, I'm not just stroking you, man. I'm being straight up with you. It's like
It's
everything you're saying. Why fight it? Why it's a line? I mean, you're in a controlled environment. Shit's gonna get warm. Why don't you just adjust and not fight it so much and make more love to it in a sense? And that's what I feel like I'm forcing it at times. And I like how I see it. I get it now.
I think and you're speaking like when you walk into a garden and you said you haven't been able to a lot, COVID and you're doing a lot via photos and videos. You really are missing out on that whole when you
Mm-hmm.
walk into a room, either the plants are going to communicate to you or yourself, you're going to think, I'm walking into a room, it's colder than I like it to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll walk in and you can just
Exactly.
feel it,
I feel
right?
it.
You just know if you're feeling it, those plants are feeling it. And part of it also comes from, uh, I think where most of these plants evolved, it's typically warmer temperatures anyway. So that's why we will push beyond 75. Like we don't even let our nighttime temperatures until the last 2-3 weeks of flowering hit below 75.
Mm.
So I know some people worry about losing terpenes by having those high temperatures. We're going to use a lot of other techniques to increase terpenes. And then, of course, it's your post harvest where you typically lose most of your terpenes. So you really want to focus more on post harvest practices to retain terpene. So we're going. I'm sorry, I'm taking it off point.
No,
But
it's okay. It's okay. And I made certain connections too around the VPD. The ideal VPD for clones is zero point 0.8 kPa. So when you look at the calendar, it's 0.8. So that point, obviously, this is for flowering, but
yeah,
you're looking for this, the 0.8.
right.
This is the 0.9, what they're referencing. In flowering, it's 1.2 to 1.5. So what they're
And
saying
we're
is,
probably closer to 1.7, I think.
but like what you're saying, this is taking into account probably a lab conditioned environment that's sterile with no microbiology. When you
Or a grower. I mean, they may have done this for a particular strain that they felt really responded well to these temperatures and humidities. We feel like if we pump in extra CO2, if we want to be preventative around PM, we're going to have the higher temperatures. We're probably going to use a little bit more water than they are. Most of our people are growing in soil, so I don't think it's an increased nutrient, but you want to make sure that you're not running into any of those deficiencies of for example, calcium, because if you're transpiring more, you could of course, move a lot of calcium and then run out of calcium.
That was actually my next question. Was before I let you go, is why is calcium locked out? Like, what happens internally within the plant for it to become a deficiency?
In large part, that deficiency is going to happen when you have a very low VPD, right? So essentially, you're not transpiring. If you're not transpiring,
It's not moving the water, not moving the
water's not
minerals.
coming into the plant. It's
So
not moving the nutrients in, right?
interesting.
And yeah, it's just it's so important to remember that. And a lot of people do grow in high humidities, right? And they don't run into powdery mildew. Some people will grow right into flower at 70, 75. Have you walked in any rooms like that?
A lot. Absolutely. I see other issues, other problems, but product looks bomb. Why am I going to say anything? They're turning it. I'm gonna be quiet, listen, watch, observe.
Exactly. And so you can do a lot of that. It's when you start having huge fluctuations between your VPD, between lights on, lights off, daytime, nighttime. That's when the plant can have other stresses, and it starts doing some differences in the amount of stomates being produced, right?
Mhm.
So it's interesting because I was reading on one of your things. It did mention how the amount of CO2 can I think it was something about causing them to absorb less, right? And that CO2 is very important in the vegetative stage. Well, we would argue that CO2 becomes more important in early flowering and flowering, because your light intensity in veg is probably not higher than 600 micromoles per meter squared per second, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mentioned this in the past, that we feel like that at that point, CO2 is not the rate limiting step. Is when you go beyond that light intensity, then CO2 becomes rate limiting. And so unless you're pumping a lot of light into your veg room, you probably don't need supplemental CO2. But once you go into flowering, you go to higher light intensities, you definitely will. And the reason why I don't like to put in a lot of CO2 in my mother rooms and perhaps in my veg rooms is that if you have too much CO2, the plant will respond by producing less spores, less pores, right? It's going to produce less stomates.
So because it doesn't need it.
It doesn't need as many. Exactly. That's exactly it. So you can almost create a mother that is producing cuttings that have less stomates because it's getting as much CO2 as it needs, because it's so present.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, this video just laid out like 3 or 4 for me. That was just like, I appreciate that, man.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things to remember about your VPD, and if you don't have those environmental conditions, oftentimes we jump to think we've got a nutrient deficiency, or we've got a nutrient excess, we've got nutrient lockout happening. And when it comes down to it, is that we just haven't produced the right environment for the plant to outgrow any of those deficiencies, right? A good healthy plant, you notice it when you hit those right conditions and you're getting an inch, 2 inches, 3 inches of growth every day. It's going to outgrow most of those deficiencies. And sometimes we overreact. We see a little bit of a curled leaf that didn't expand quickly enough, or we see a little blotch, and we wonder what that was. It was probably a VPD issue. It just didn't have the right environment to grow. It didn't grow out of it. But this plant does grow fast. It can grow out of a lot of these deficiencies with the right environment.
You really did. Not to just talk about it again, but to talk about it again. It's when you really think about it, right? You're like, yeah, of course these plants can grow 2 to 3 inches in a day. And then you're thinking, okay, yeah, a deformity in a little section of a leaf could probably be absent really quickly. Actually, I mean, you're not seeing it as it's growing, but what you're seeing it as the leaf and the rest is expanding and growing into the rest of its maturity, you're seeing the absent part. And in that one part, like you're saying, if like that's how important these minerals are when they're like, especially the immobile nutrients, or like you say, the ones that aren't as mobile after they're placed. And that's just the other day, when I text you, I was like, is it some type of amino acid issue because the building blocks like I was like nitrogen or something, but it's just so obvious calcium, because that's what's needed for cell structure, and cell structure is missing. And like what you were talking to me the other day about plant deficiencies, fixate on the primary of the deficiency, not the secondary, right? And the primary is the freaking leaf is missing. So what's missing? You know, what was it provided? Calcium. Oh, okay, that makes sense. I should go with that one.
Yeah. It's VPD is definitely something that more experienced growers will be able to comment more on, because they've seen enough plants grow. They've seen plants grow at 70 degrees, and they've seen plants grow at 80 degrees, and they know the difference. And it is harder for a new time grower to say, it's hard for them maybe to recognize that their plant isn't growing as fast as it should, right? Mm-hmm. But in our experience, if your plant isn't growing sort of an inch a day, or half, maybe sometimes 2 inches a day, you're probably not in the ideal environment, right? So it's either light intensity, temperature, humidity, something's off. If your plant is stunted and not growing the way, a more experienced grower will say, okay, my plant is not growing as fast as I normally would expect it to grow. Mm-hmm. That's when you feel like, okay, maybe I don't have my VPD dialed in.
Again, you're just confirming what you're saying. One of my growers, he's almost hit 4 pounds in a 5x5 square feet of space, right? And so, and I tell people all this, like from seed popping to when he flips into veg is 5 weeks, and the plants are big at that point. Already big. And the other people's plants that are 5 weeks, they might be like this, while his are like this, and they're producing. And I sometimes I don't like to tell people that, because I don't want them to feel bad, but I'm like, guys, but this is what these plants can do. I think you need to be aware of that, because again, we're talking about like a lot of growers that don't have the experience of how these plants can really perform, or in general, any plants, tomatoes, lettuce, like how should they, the ideal growing conditions should they be growing? Okay, this is the ideal. This is what I got. How do I like get to that, like slim the margin, or right, like get to that point?
And it is amazing how many things that we do as growers that screw that up, right? Mm-hmm. So it sounds like your growers got it dialed in, not only in environment, but probably in terms of nutrients as well. Mm-hmm. And, as somebody who designs a lot of these just add water soils, they're not always in balance. And there's no question that sometimes I've got too much of this and too little of this. And when I don't have it in perfect balance, those plants do not respond as well, right? So it does come back to, in many ways, leading right up to drops of balance. Balance is so important in trying to create that Goldilocks zone of VPD and the Goldilocks zone of nutrients.
Bro, thank you so much for coming on the channel today. This was incredibly rewarding. I know people are going to get a lot of value out of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Anytime. All right, brother. I guess I'll talk to you later. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Is it normal that if you took a clone and put it side by side with a plant that was from seed, I think from seed you're going to get a lot more production out of it than you would the clone? And is that a thing?